blood on a white snowbank. A betrayal so deep it severed an empire. Tonight, Damian Russo, the most feared man in the Chicago syndicate, isn't a king, he's a dead man walking. Hunted by his own lieutenants and bleeding out in the freezing rain, his last hope is a crumbling apartment door in the slums of the South Side. Behind it, a desperate single mother fighting just to keep the heat on. What happens when the devil asks for sanctuary? The answer will cost them everything. The wind howling off Lake Michigan sounded like a dying animal battering the cracked window panes of apartment 4B. Harley Hayes sat at her cramped kitchen table, a chipped mug of lukewarm tea pressed between her palms. The radiator in the corner gave a pathetic rhythmic hiss, offering more noise than actual heat. Across the tiny, dimly lit room, her 5-year-old daughter Mia was asleep on a pull-out sofa, buried under 3 layers of thrift store blankets. Harley stared at the collection of past due notices spread across the peeling Formica table. Final notice for electricity, final notice for rent. The eviction warning was printed on an aggressive neon pink paper that seemed to mock the dreary gray of her reality. She had exactly $42 to her name, and Mia needed a refill on her asthma inhaler by Tuesday. It was 2:14 a.m. The neighborhood of Pilsen was usually alive with the muffled sounds of sirens or distant arguments, but tonight the blizzard had buried the city in an eerie, suffocating silence. Then came the thud. It wasn't a knock. It was the heavy, wet sound of dead weight collapsing against the wood of her front door. Harley froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes darted to the deadbolt. In this building, you didn't open the door after dark. You didn't even look through the peephole. You turned off the lights and prayed whatever nightmare was in the hallway moved on to someone else. But then she heard the scraping, fingernails clawing weakly at the wood, followed by a low, ragged groan. Harley stood, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She crept toward the door, her stockinged feet silent on the warped linoleum. She pressed her eye to the scratched peephole. The hallway bulb was flickering, casting a sickly yellow strobe light over the corridor. At first, she saw nothing. Then her gaze dropped. A man was slumped against her doorframe. He was massive, wearing a tailored charcoal overcoat that looked entirely out of place in this run-down tenement. But what caught Harley's breath wasn't the expensive wool or the gleam of a gold watch on his wrist. It was the dark, glistening pool expanding rapidly across the dirty floorboards beneath him. Blood. So much blood. Every survival instinct screamed at her to walk away. Call 911 maybe, but keep the door locked. The police in this district, however, were notoriously slow, and sometimes they brought more trouble than they solved. He's dying, her conscience whispered. Harley swallowed hard. She undid the chain lock with trembling fingers and turned the deadbolt. As she pulled the door inward, the man's weight tipped backward. He crashed onto her entryway floor, bringing with him the sharp metallic stench of copper and the freezing scent of ozone and snow. He lay on his back, gasping for air. His face was a canvas of bruises and lacerations, but underneath the grime and blood, his features were strikingly sharp. A strong jawline covered in dark stubble, a straight aristocratic nose, and raven black hair plastered to his forehead with sweat and sleet. "Hey," Harley whispered, dropping to her knees. "Hey, can you hear me? I'm calling an ambulance." She reached for the cheap flip phone in her pocket, but before her fingers could even grasp the plastic, a hand shot out like a viper. His grip on her wrist was terrifyingly strong, bruising the delicate skin instantly. Harley gasped, her eyes snapping down to meet his. His eyes were a piercing, stormy gray, glazed with pain, but burning with a lethal, terrifying intensity. "No cops!" He rasped, his voice a gravelly baritone that sent a shiver down her spine. Blood bubbled at the corner of his lips. "No hospitals! They own them!" "You're bleeding to death," Harley hissed, trying to pull her arm away, but his grip was like a steel vise. "You've been shot." "Listen to me." The man choked out, his chest heaving as he pulled her closer. The metallic smell of his blood was overpowering. My name is Damien. If you call the cops, the men who did this will come. They will kill me, and then they will kill you and anyone else in this room." Harley's blood ran cold. She glanced over her shoulder. Mia shifted on the sofa, murmuring softly in her sleep. Panic, raw and suffocating, clawed at Harley's throat. She had let a monster into her home. "I have money," Damien whispered, his eyelids fluttering as shock began to set in. He reached into the inner pocket of his ruined coat with his free hand and pulled out a thick, blood-stained manila envelope. It hit the linoleum with a heavy thwack. 50,000, cash. Just patch me up, hide me for 2 days, then I'm gone. Harley stared at the envelope. The pink eviction notice flashed in her mind's eye. Mia's empty inhaler. The crushing, suffocating weight of her poverty. $50,000 was a lifeline. It was a new apartment, a new city, a new life. But it was blood money. Damien's grip on her wrist finally went slack as his eyes rolled back into his head. He passed out completely on her floor, leaving Harley staring at the notorious syndicate boss of the city, bleeding out on her $20 rug. She had two choices: drag him back into the hall and wash her hands of him, or make a deal with the devil. Harley looked at Mia. Then she looked at the envelope. With a shaking breath, Harley stood up, locked the door, and went to the bathroom to get her first aid kit. It took Harley 2 hours to clean the mess. She had dropped out of nursing school 3 years ago when Mia was diagnosed with severe asthma, and the medical bills began to drown them. But muscle memory took over. Damien had taken 2 bullets. One had grazed his ribs, a messy, bloody flesh wound, but manageable. The second was the real problem. A 9mm slug was lodged deep in his left shoulder. Harley worked in frantic, terrified silence. She had stripped off his ruined overcoat and his tailored suit jacket, cutting away the bloody, custom-made white dress shirt beneath. His body was a map of old violence. Faded scars crisscrossed his abdomen and chest, telling a story of a life lived entirely on the razor's edge. She sterilized a pair of needle-nose pliers with boiling water and rubbing alcohol. When she dug into his shoulder to retrieve the bullet, Damien didn't wake, but his body convulsed a guttural groan, ripping through his clenched teeth. "Hold still, damn it," Harley whispered, sweat beading on her forehead. With a sickening squelch, she clamped down on the distorted piece of lead and pulled it free, dropping it into a tin bowl. It clinked loudly in the quiet room. She packed the wound with gauze, stitched the jagged edges of his skin with heavy-duty thread, and bound his chest tight with torn strips of bedsheets. When she was finally done, her hands were dyed a rusty, terrifying crimson. She dragged him in agonizing, back-breaking effort onto a worn-out mattress. She pulled from her own tiny bedroom, hiding him out of sight behind the kitchen partition. By 6 a.m., the blizzard outside had turned the sky a bruised, milky purple. Harley sat in a wooden chair a few feet away from the mattress, a heavy kitchen knife resting on her lap. She hadn't slept a wink. A low groan pulled her from her exhaustion. Damien shifted on the mattress. His storm-gray eyes snapped open. There was no grogginess, no disorientation. The moment he was awake, he was entirely lucid, his gaze scanning the room with the predatory calculation of a wolf assessing a trap. His eyes locked onto Harley. Then they fell to the knife in her lap. "If I wanted to hurt you," Damien said, his voice raspy and dry as sandpaper, "a kitchen knife wouldn't stop me." "You've lost half your blood," Harley countered, trying to keep her voice steady, though her hands trembled. "You can barely sit up. Don't test me." A ghost of a smirk touched his lips, though it clearly pained him. "Fair point. Where am I?" "But South Side. Pilsen. Apartment 4. B," Harley said. "You collapsed at my door. You told me not to call the cops. You offered me money." Damien's eyes darkened as the memories flooded back. He looked down at his bare chest, tracing the neat professional stitches on his shoulder and the tight bindings around his ribs. "You did this?" "I was halfway through a nursing degree before life got in the way," Harley said coldly. "Don't get used to it. The deal was 2 days, then you're gone. And I'm keeping the envelope." "Keep it," Damien said, leaning his head back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. It's chump change anyway. Harley felt a flash of irritation. It's a fortune to me. Damien turned his head to look at her properly. Really look at her. He took in her tired, beautiful face, the dark circles under her hazel eyes, her messy auburn hair tied up in a chaotic bun. He noticed the frayed cuffs of her sweater and the way she sat defensively, angling her body between him and the living room area. "Who else is here?" he asked softly. "None of your business." "I heard breathing. A child. You have a kid." Harley tightened her grip on the knife handle. "If you even look at her, I will dig that bullet out of the trash and shove it back into your chest myself." Damien didn't smile this time. A profound, heavy darkness settled over his features. "I don't hurt women, and I don't hurt kids. The men looking for me, however, they don't share my morals." "Who are they?" Harley asked, the reality of the situation sinking deeper into her bones. Damien closed his eyes. "My own family. My underboss, Vincent Gallo. We were supposed to meet at the docks for a shipment, standard protocol, but the shipment was a ghost. Vincent had the entire warehouse rigged. Half my loyal men were slaughtered. I barely made it out alive. He bought off my drivers, my bodyguards. The city is his now." Harley swallowed hard. She didn't know the intricate workings of the Chicago mob, but everyone knew the Russo name. The syndicates controlled the ports, the politicians, the police. If Vincent Gallo had taken out the head of the Russo family, there would be a war in the streets. "Why my door?" Harley asked. "I didn't choose it," Damien murmured, his energy fading rapidly. "I dumped my car 3 blocks away to throw them off. I was walking, looking for somewhere to bleed out in peace. Your door was the only one with light shining under the crack." Harley realized she had left the kitchen light on because the switch was broken. A broken switch had brought the Mafia into her living room. "You need antibiotics," Harley said, changing the subject before the panic could fully consume her. "I cleaned it the best I could, but the tools weren't sterile. You'll go into sepsis by tomorrow if I don't get you penicillin." "You can't go to a pharmacy," Damien said, his eyes opening in alarm. "Gallo's men will be watching the clinics, the drugstores. Anywhere a gunshot victim might send a runner." "I don't go to normal pharmacies," Harley said grimly. She stood up, placing the knife on the counter. "There's an underground clinic 3 blocks from here. An old vet named Arthur runs it for folks who don't have papers. He owes me a favor." Damien stared at her, assessing her strength. She looked frail, but there was a core of iron in this woman. "Be careful," he said quietly. "I'm doing this for the 50 grand, Harley shot back. "Don't pretend you care." As Harley threw on her coat, she heard the soft padding of footsteps. Little Mia stood in the hallway, clutching a stuffed rabbit, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Mommy," Mia mumbled. "Who is the man?" Harley rushed over, blocking Mia's view of the blood-stained mattress. "Just a friend, baby. He's sick. He's going to sleep here for a little bit." From the floor, Damien watched the little girl. He, a man who had ordered the destruction of empires, felt a strange foreign tightening in his chest. He had brought death to their doorstep. The morning sun did nothing to warm the frozen concrete of the Pilsen district. Harley stepped out of her building, shivering violently as the bitter wind sliced through her thin wool coat. The snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets, burying the rusted husks of parked cars. She kept her head down, walking briskly toward Arthur's clinic. Every passing car made her pulse spike. Every shadow in an alleyway looked like a hitman holding a suppressed pistol. Damien's words echoed in her head. They own the city now. Arthur's clinic was tucked behind a dilapidated laundromat. It smelled strongly of bleach, stale cigarette smoke, and wet dog. Arthur, a heavy-set man in his 60s with a gray beard and cynical eyes, looked up from a clipboard as the bell above the door chimed. "Harley!" he grunted. "You're out early in a blizzard. Mia's asthma acting up again." "No, Artie. I need a favor," Harley said, stepping up to the counter and keeping her voice low. "I need broad-spectrum antibiotics, amoxicillin strong dose, and I need proper bandages, sterile saline, and iodine." Arthur's eyes narrowed. He put the clipboard down. He leaned over the counter, inspecting the faint smudges of dried blood Harley had missed on the cuffs of her sleeves. "Who's bleeding, Harley?" Arthur asked quietly. "I can't tell you that. You know how it works." Arthur sighed, rubbing a hand over his tired face. "Listen to me very carefully. Word on the street is the Russo syndicate had a civil war last night. The docks ran red. Half the north side is locked down, and Vincent Gallo's goons are tearing through the south side looking for a ghost. If you are hiding who I think you might be hiding, I'm not—" Harley lied smoothly, though her heart felt like it was going to beat out of her chest. "It's my cousin. He got in a knife fight over a bad debt. I can't take him to the ER." Arthur stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Finally, he turned and went into the back room. He returned a minute later with a brown paper bag and pushed it across the counter. $60, Arthur said. "And Harley, if the men in the black SUVs come knocking, I never saw you." "Thanks, Artie." Harley threw 3 crumpled $20 bills on the counter, money taken from Damien's envelope, and hurried out the door. The walk back was a nightmare. 3 blocks from her apartment, a sleek black Lincoln Navigator rolled slowly down the snow-packed street. It had tinted windows and no license plates. Harley froze, ducking into the alcove of a closed bodega. She held her breath as the SUV crawled past the crunch of its heavy tires on the snow, sounding like breaking bones. It stopped directly in front of her apartment building. Harley clutched the brown paper bag to her chest. 2 men stepped out of the vehicle. They wore heavy dark coats, their postures rigid and alert. One of them pointed at the front door of her tenement, then looked down at the snow. The blood trail. Harley had cleaned the hallway inside, but she hadn't thought about the stoop outside. The snow had covered most of it, but there might still be traces. She watched paralyzed as the 2 men walked up the concrete steps. They didn't knock. They slipped inside the main lobby. Panic seized her. Mia was up there, with him. Harley sprinted from the alcove, slipping on the ice, her boots sliding wildly, but she caught her balance and bolted for the back alley. She knew the fire escape in the rear of the building was broken, but it was the only way up without running directly into Gallo's men. She scrambled up a rusted dumpster, grabbing the icy rungs of the iron ladder. The metal bit into her bare hands like glass. She climbed frantically 2 stories, 3 stories, hauling herself over the railing onto the 4th-floor balcony. She peered through her own kitchen window. Inside, the scene made her blood run cold. Damien was no longer on the mattress. He was standing, leaning heavily against the wall for support, his face pale and sweating. In his good right hand, he held a sleek black handgun pointed directly at the front door. Where had he hidden the gun she had stripped him? Who? Then she saw Mia. Damien had tucked the 5-year-old girl behind him, shielding her tiny body with his own massive, battered frame. Mia looked frightened, clutching her stuffed rabbit, but she wasn't crying. Damien was speaking to her softly over his shoulder, his words inaudible through the glass, but his posture was relentlessly protective. Someone pounded heavily on the apartment door. Bang, bang, bang. "Maintenance!" a gruff voice called out from the hallway. "Open up!" Harley tapped the glass frantically. Damien spun around the gun, tracking to the window in a fraction of a second. His eyes widened when he saw her. He hobbled to the window and unlatched it, letting her climb inside. "They're here!" Harley gasped, dropping the pharmacy bag on the counter. 2 of them. "I know," Damien whispered, his jaw clenched in agony. He looked at Harley. "Take the kid. Go to the bathroom. Lock the door. If they breach, I'll drop them, but it's going to be loud." "If you shoot a gun in here, the whole building will call the cops," Harley hissed, "and more of Gallo's men will come. Give me the gun." Damien stared at her like she was insane. "Are you out of your mind? Give me the gun and hide behind the couch." Harley commanded, her maternal instincts entirely overriding her fear. "I am a desperate mother. I can play the part. Hide. Now." Another heavy pound on the door, accompanied by the jiggling of the doorknob. "Hey, open the door or we're kicking it in." Damien hesitated, his gray eyes searching hers. For the first time in his ruthless life, Damian Russo had to trust someone else to keep him alive. He handed her the heavy firearm. Harley shoved the gun under a couch cushion. Damian dragged his bleeding body behind the large, worn-out sectional sofa, entirely out of view from the front door. Harley took a deep breath, messed up her hair to look like she had just woken up, and grabbed Mia's hand. She marched to the front door and threw the deadbolt back. She opened the door, just a crack keeping the chain locked. Two men filled the doorway. One had a scar running through his eyebrow. He looked at Harley with dead reptilian eyes. "What do you want?" Harley snapped, injecting every ounce of exhausted, angry mother into her tone. "It's Sunday morning. My kid is sick." "Sorry to bother you, ma'am," the scarred man said, his tone entirely devoid of apology. He tried to push the door open, but the chain held firm. "We're looking for a friend of ours. Tall guy. Dark hair. Might be hurt. Have you seen him?" "A hurt guy," Harley let out a bitter laugh. "Buddy, I haven't seen anything but late bills and my kid's asthma inhaler. If there's a bleeding man in my hallway, I'm calling the landlord." The second man peered through the crack, his eyes scanning what little of the apartment he could see. "You mind if we come in and take a look around, just to be safe?" "I absolutely mind," Harley said fiercely. "I don't know you. You aren't cops. You step foot in this apartment, I'm screaming bloody murder, and there are 30 people on this floor who will come out with baseball bats." The scarred man's jaw tightened. For a terrifying second, Harley thought he was going to pull out a gun and shoot through the wood. The air between them grew thick and dangerous. Behind Harley, Mia whimpered perfectly on cue, clutching her mother's leg. The scarred man looked at the little girl, then back to Harley's defiant, furious eyes. "All right, lady, take it easy. We're just checking." He stepped back. "If you see him, you'd be smart to call the number on this card." He slid a plain white business card through the crack in the door. It fell to the floor. "Have a nice day," Harley said coldly, and slammed the door in his face. She threw the deadbolt and pressed her back against the wood, her knees shaking so violently she almost collapsed. She listened to their heavy footsteps retreat down the hallway. Only when she heard the distant slam of the lobby door downstairs did she let out a choked sob. Damian slowly pulled himself up from behind the couch. He looked at the trembling woman by the door, and then at the little girl holding onto her leg. "You're a terrifying woman, Harley Hayes," Damian said quietly, his voice laced with genuine respect. Harley picked up the plain white card from the floor. No name, just a phone number. "They're searching door to door," Harley said, her voice shaking as she looked at him. "They aren't going to stop. What do we do now?" Damian's eyes darkened, the ruthless mafia boss returning to the surface. "Now you patch me up, and then I teach you how to start a war." The antibiotics kicked in just as Damian's fever spiked to a terrifying, delirious height. For the next 12 hours, the cramped apartment became a battlefield against infection. Harley moved with mechanical precision, entirely fueled by adrenaline and the grim reality that a dead mafia boss on her living room floor would mean an automatic death sentence for her and Mia. She boiled water, crushed the amoxicillin into a fine white powder, and forced it down Damian's throat mixed with lukewarm tea. He fought her in his delirium, his massive hands batting weakly at her wrists, muttering names in rapid, furious Italian. He spoke of ledgers of blood oaths and of a man named Dominic. Mia stayed in the bedroom, coloring quietly with her crayons, acutely aware of the strange, dangerous energy pulsating through her home. By Sunday evening, the wind died down, leaving the city entombed in ice. Harley was dozing in the wooden kitchen chair, her head resting on the cold formica table, when she heard the rustle of the mattress. She snapped awake, her hand instinctively reaching for the heavy kitchen knife. Damian was sitting up. The deathly pallor had left his face, replaced by a bruised, exhausted grimness. He was staring at his own chest, inspecting the fresh bandages Harley had applied. "You didn't run." Damian observed, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate right through the floorboards. "I considered it," Harley said, sitting back and crossing her arms to hide the slight tremor in her hands. But Gallows men are sitting in a black SUV at the end of the block. If I pack up my kid and leave now, they'll know exactly why. Damien nodded slowly, processing the tactical nightmare they were in. He looked at Harley, his storm-gray eyes sharp and clear. The fever was gone. The predator was back. "They're establishing a perimeter," Damien murmured, leaning his head against the peeling wallpaper. "Vincent knows I'm bleeding. He knows I couldn't have gotten far from the dump site. He's squeezing the neighborhood." "So what's the grand plan?" Harley asked bitterly. "Because right now my grand plan is hoping they don't bring a battering ram to my door before the rent is due." "I need a phone," Damien stated flatly. "A clean one, a burner." "I have a prepaid flip phone," Harley offered, pulling the cheap plastic device from her pocket. "No?" Damien shook his head, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitched shoulder. "Vincent has the local cell towers monitored. The moment I dial a known syndicate number, he'll triangulate the signal. They'll have a strike team kicking down your door in less than 5 minutes. Harley's breath hitched. "Then how do you contact your people?" "There is a protocol for this." Damien explained, his gaze locked onto hers with unsettling intensity. "A dead drop. I need you to go to a specific location, use a specific payphone, and call a number. You will leave a message for my top captain, Dominic Rossi. If Dominic is still alive and if he hasn't flipped to Vincent's side, he will come for me. And if he has flipped, then I'm dead, and I'll make sure to crawl out into the hallway before I expire so you don't have to clean up the mess," Damien replied without a trace of irony. Harley stared at him. He spoke of death and betrayal as casually as someone discussing the weather. It was a stark reminder of the chasm between their worlds. She was fighting to keep the electricity on. He was fighting a war for the soul of the city's underworld. "Where is this payphone?" she asked, her voice tight. "Corner of 18th and Halstead. An old Italian diner called Sal's. There's a bank of payphones in the back near the restrooms. The third one from the left is hardwired differently. It bypasses standard local switches. It's a relic from my father's era." Damien gestured vaguely toward his ruined suit jacket draped over a chair. "In the left pocket. There's a silver money clip. Bring it." Harley stood, retrieved the jacket, and dug her fingers into the silk lining. She pulled out a heavy sterling silver money clip engraved with a sharp stylized R. It held a thick wad of $100 bills. "Take 500, Damien instructed. "Sal will be working the grill. He's old, grumpy, and completely blind in his left eye. Order a black coffee. Slide the money in the clip across the counter. Tell him the winter is harsh, but the roots are deep." "The winter is harsh, but the roots are deep," Harley repeated, feeling entirely ridiculous and utterly terrified. "It sounds like a bad spy movie." "It's a verification code," Damien corrected, unamused. "It tells Sal I'm alive. He will give you a token. Use it in the third payphone. Dial the number I give you. When the machine picks up, you say 3 words, Sanctuary and Pilsen. Hang up, walk away, and make sure you aren't followed." Harley looked at the silver clip in her hand. The metal felt heavy, practically vibrating with the dark history of the Russo family. She glanced toward the bedroom door. "I can't leave Mia alone, not with Gallows men outside." "I will protect her," Damien said softly. The absolute certainty in his voice startled her. "I swear on my life, Harley, nothing comes through that door while I'm drawing breath." It was a terrifying leap of faith, but as Harley looked into the eyes of the bleeding mafia boss, she realized something profound. Damien Russo was a killer, a criminal, a monster to many. But he was not a liar. "If you let anything happen to her," Harley whispered, her hazel eyes blazing with a mother's fierce, desperate fury, "I won't need Gallows men to finish you off." Damien nodded once. Respect flickered in his steely gaze. "Understood." The cold outside was a physical assault. Harley pulled her scarf tightly around her face, keeping her head down as she navigated the icy, treacherous sidewalks of Pilsen. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the usual hum of city life suffocated by the heavy snowfall and the invisible, oppressive weight of the mob war brewing in the shadows. She spotted the black SUV. It was parked 2 blocks down, idling near a street lamp, its exhaust pluming like dragon's breath in the freezing air. Harley crossed the street to avoid walking past it, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It took her 20 minutes to reach 18th and Halstead. Sal's diner looked like it hadn't been updated since 1982. The neon sign buzzed erratically, missing the A, casting a sickly red glow over the snowbanks. Harley pushed through the heavy glass door. A bell chimed cheerfully, a jarring contrast to the grim tension twisting her stomach. The diner smelled intensely of fried onions, old grease, and bitter coffee. It was mostly empty, save for 2 tired-looking truckers in a booth near the window. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with a stained white apron and a deeply lined, scowling face. His left eye was milky and unseeing. Sal. Harley approached the counter, sliding onto a cracked red vinyl stool. Her hands were shaking as she placed them on the cool, sticky laminate. "What can I get you?" Sal grunted, wiping down the counter with a damp rag, not even looking up. "Black coffee," Harley managed to say, her voice sounding entirely too thin. Sal turned to a large industrial coffee urn, filled a heavy ceramic mug, and placed it in front of her. $2. Harley reached into her pocket. She pulled out the $500 neatly folded inside the heavy silver money clip. She placed it flat on the counter and slid it slowly toward the old man. Sal's good eye locked onto the engraved R. His hand stopped mid-wipe. The diner suddenly felt incredibly quiet, the buzzing of the neon sign outside amplifying in the silence. Harley leaned in close, forcing the words past the tight lump in her throat. "The winter is harsh, but the roots are deep." Sal didn't blink. He casually threw his rag over the money clip, scooped it up in one fluid motion, and dropped it into the deep pocket of his apron. He turned his back to her, grabbing a small, dirty glass ashtray from a back shelf. He set it down next to her coffee. Inside the ashtray was a single heavy brass token. It looked like an old arcade coin, but it lacked any markings. "Restrooms are in the back," Sal muttered, turning away to scrape down the grill. Harley grabbed the token, her palms sweating despite the chill of the diner. She slipped off the stool and walked toward the dimly lit hallway in the rear. There, flanked by the men's and women's bathroom doors, was a row of 3 ancient, bulky payphones. She walked to the third one on the left. It looked completely dead. No dial tone, no lights. Harley dropped the heavy brass token into the slot. Instantly, the phone clicked. A harsh electronic buzzing filled her ear, followed by a rapid series of clicks like an old rotary dial spinning at light speed. Then it rang. It rang exactly twice before a mechanical, distorted voice answered. "Leave the message." Harley gripped the plastic receiver so tightly her knuckles turned white. She glanced nervously over her shoulder to make sure the hallway was empty. "Sanctuary in Pilsen," she whispered into the mouthpiece. The line went dead with a sharp clack. Harley hung up the phone, her knees weak. She had done it. She had cast her lot with the devil. There was no going back to her quiet, desperate life of eviction notices and ignored bills. She was now an active participant in a syndicate war. She hurried back into the main dining area, leaving her coffee untouched, and pushed her way out the door into the freezing night. She needed to get back to Mia. Fast. Harley jogged down the icy sidewalk, her boots slipping, her breath pluming in the air. She took a shortcut down an alleyway behind a row of closed auto shops, hoping to shave 5 minutes off her return trip. It was a fatal mistake. Halfway down the alley, the crunch of heavy boots on snow echoed behind her. Harley froze. She turned her head slowly. 2 men were stepping out from the shadows of a recessed loading dock. They weren't wearing the standard dark coats of Gallows street-level enforcers. These men wore tactical gear underneath heavy parkas. One of them held a suppressed automatic weapon, the long black silencer gleaming dully in the moonlight. "Well, well," the taller man said, his voice a mocking drawl. "Look who decided to go for a midnight stroll. The angry mother from apartment 4B. Harley's blood turned to ice. It was the scarred man from her door. They hadn't believed her act. They had been watching her building the whole time. You moved pretty fast out of that diner. The scarred man continued, stepping closer, the snow crunching ominously beneath his boots. You didn't even drink your coffee. Who did you call sweetheart? I don't know what you're talking about, Harley lied, her voice trembling. She began backing up slowly, scanning the alley for a weapon, a fire escape, and exit. There was nothing but brick and ice. Don't play stupid, the second man snarled, raising the weapon slightly. Gallo wants to know who the boss reached out to. Tell us who you called and maybe we don't pay a visit to that cute little girl you left upstairs. The mention of Mia struck Harley like a physical blow. A primal explosive anger flared in her chest, burning away the terror. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was a mother, cornered by wolves. I called the cops, Harley spat, her eyes blazing. And if you shoot me here, the whole block will hear it. The scarred man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. This thing has a suppressor, honey. The only thing the block will hear is the wind. He raised his hand, signaling the other man to advance. Suddenly, the roar of a high-powered engine shattered the silence of the alley. Twin beams of blinding halogen headlights flooded the narrow space, trapping the two hitmen in their glare. A sleek, armored black sedan tore down the alleyway at breakneck speed, fishtailing wildly on the ice. The hitmen scrambled, diving toward the loading dock to avoid being crushed against the brick walls. The sedan slammed the brakes, skidding to a halt exactly 3 feet from Harley. The back passenger door was thrown violently open. Inside sat a man in a sharp, tailored three-piece suit. He had slicked back dark hair and a heavily tattooed neck. In his hands, he held a compact submachine gun. "Get in!" the man roared, his voice cutting through the panic. "Rossi sent me. Get in the damn car!" Harley didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She dove into the back seat of the sedan just as the hitmen opened fire. The muted thwip, thwip, thwip of suppressed gunfire peppered the side of the car, shattering the window directly above her head. "Drive," the tattooed man barked at the driver. The tires squealed, fighting for traction, before the sedan launched forward, tearing out of the alleyway and plunging Harley headfirst into the bloody, chaotic heart of the Chicago mob. The interior of the armored sedan smelled of ozone-burnt gunpowder and expensive leather. Harley lay pinned against the cold floorboards, shards of tempered glass raining down on her coat as the vehicle swerved violently onto 18th Street. The tires screamed against the asphalt, fishtailing through the heavy Chicago snow. "Keep your head down!" the tattooed man yelled, racking the bolt of his submachine gun. He tapped the driver's shoulder. "Punch it, Dante, lose them before we hit the Eisenhower." Harley struggled to sit up, her hands trembling violently. "My daughter, you have to turn around. My daughter is in that apartment." The tattooed man looked down at her, his dark eyes assessing her panic. "My name is Leo. Dominic Rossi sent me. If you're the woman who called the dead drop, then you're the one keeping the boss breathing. We're going to your apartment right now." He tapped an earpiece hidden in his ear. "Strike Team Alpha, we have the asset. Converging on the Pilsen address. Expect heavy resistance." Gallo's men are already there. Harley choked out terror, gripping her throat so tightly she could barely breathe. "They've been watching the building. Then we go through them," Leo said coldly. The sedan tore through the deserted streets, running red lights and clipping snowbanks. When they skidded to a halt at the end of Harley's block, the street was already a war zone. 3 black Lincoln Navigators were parked haphazardly in front of her tenement building. Men in tactical gear were pouring out, weapons drawn, moving toward the front entrance. "Dante, light 'em up!" Leo roared. The sedan lurched forward, transforming into a battering ram. It slammed into the nearest Navigator with a sickening crunch of metal, sending 2 of Gallo's men flying into the snow. Leo kicked his door open before the car even fully stopped, unleashing a deafening volley of suppressing fire. The deafening roar of automatic weapons echoed off the brick buildings, a terrifying symphony of violence, shattering the quiet neighborhood. "Stay behind me." Leo grabbed Harley by the collar of her coat, hauling her out of the vehicle. Harley didn't care about the bullets snapping through the air like angry hornets. She didn't care about the bodies dropping into the dirty snow. Her mind was a singular, blinding loop. Mia, Mia, Mia. She sprinted up the icy front steps behind Leo and two other heavily armed syndicate soldiers. They kicked in the lobby doors, sweeping the narrow, flickering hallway. The air was thick with drywall dust and the sharp sting of cordite. "Fourth floor, move!" Leo barked. Harley scrambled up the stairs, her lungs burning, her legs threatening to give out. When they reached the fourth floor landing, Harley's heart stopped. The door to apartment 4B had been blown off its hinges. The cheap wood was splintered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Lying in the threshold was the massive frame of the scarred hitman from the alleyway, a single precise bullet hole resting dead center in his forehead. "Mia!" Harley screamed, shoving past Leo's men, heedless of the danger. She stumbled into the ruined living room. The apartment was completely trashed. Bullet holes riddled the thin walls, and the cheap sofa had been shredded by automatic fire. But there, backed into the narrow corner of the kitchen, was Damien Russo. He was sitting on the floor, his face drained of all color, his breathing shallow and ragged. The crude bandages Harley had applied were soaked through with fresh blood. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, but his right hand was steady, aiming the heavy black pistol directly at the doorway. Tucked behind him, completely shielded by his massive battered body, was Mia. Damien had thrown his heavy wool overcoat over her to protect her from flying debris. Her small hands were clamped tightly over her ears, her eyes squeezed shut, but she was unharmed. Damien's gun tracked Harley as she burst in his eyes, wild and feverish. It took him a split second to register who it was. "Mommy!" Mia shrieked, scrambling out from under the coat and throwing herself across the ruined linoleum. Harley dropped to her knees, catching her daughter in a desperate, crushing embrace. She buried her face in Mia's hair, sobbing uncontrollably. "I've got you. Mommy's got you." Leo stepped into the apartment, his weapon lowered. He looked at the dead hitman in the hall, the shredded room, and finally at the bleeding boss on the floor. "You look like hell, boss," Leo said, his voice thick with relief. Damien let his head fall back against the cabinets, the pistol slipping from his fingers. "Took you long enough, Leo. Get us the hell out of here." Two medics rushed into the room, immediately dropping bags of high-end trauma gear. They began packing Damien's wounds, injecting him with morphine and broad-spectrum antibiotics directly from vials bearing the label of a private Medline pharmaceutical cache. Harley clutched Mia, rocking her back and forth. Damien looked past the medics, his storm-gray eyes finding Harley's. Amidst the blood, the ruin, and the sirens now wailing in the distance, a silent vow passed between them. He had kept his promise. Now, her life belonged to the syndicate. They didn't go to a hospital. They didn't go to a basement clinic. The armored convoy bypassed the chaos of the South Side, entirely slipping onto Lakeshore Drive and heading straight for the Gold Coast. Harley sat in the back of a luxury transport van, her arms wrapped protectively around a sleeping Mia. The adrenaline crash had left her numb, her eyes staring blankly at the passing city lights. She felt like a ghost, completely detached from the reality of the leather seats and the armed men riding in the front. The convoy descended into a private subterranean parking garage beneath a gleaming glass high-rise. They took a private elevator equipped with biometric scanners straight to the penthouse level. When the polished steel doors parted, Harley stepped into a world she had only ever seen in magazines. The safe house was a sprawling multi-million-dollar fortress in the sky. Floor-to-ceiling bulletproof windows overlooked the icy black expanse of Lake Michigan. The floors were heated Italian marble, the furniture custom minimalist leather. It was a gilded cage, isolated entirely from the poverty she had fought so hard against just hours ago. Damien was rushed into a converted master bedroom that looked more like a state-of-the-art trauma bay. A private surgeon, a man with slicked-back gray hair and a calm, clinical demeanor, was already scrubbing in. "Take the child to the East Wing," Leo instructed a female operative, gesturing toward a hallway lined with modern art. "Get her whatever she wants, food, toys, whatever." "I'm staying with her," Harley snapped instantly, her maternal instincts flaring. She gripped Mia tighter. "No one takes my daughter from me." "No one is taking her, Harley," A deep, smooth voice echoed from the foyer. A man stepped into the ambient light of the living room. He wore a perfectly tailored midnight blue suit, his dark hair cut impeccably. He possessed a sharp, intelligent face, but his eyes held the same ruthless calculation as Damien's. This was Dominic Rossi, Damien's most trusted captain. Dominic approached slowly, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "My name is Dominic. You saved my boss's life tonight. That means you are under the absolute protection of the Russo family. But Vincent Gallo knows what you look like. He knows your address. He has eyes in the Chicago Police Department. If you walk out of this penthouse, you and the little girl are dead before sunrise." Harley's stomach plummeted. "I just wanted to pay my rent," she whispered, the sheer absurdity of her situation crashing down on her. "I just wanted to buy her medicine." "I know," Dominic said softly. "The East Wing has a bedroom. It's safe. Settle her in. The doctor needs to operate on Damien immediately. When he wakes up, he's going to want to see you." For the next 3 hours, Harley sat on the edge of a massive cloud-like king bed. Mia slept soundly, exhausted by the trauma and comforted by the warm, luxurious blankets. Harley couldn't sleep. She paced the room, her reflection staring back at her from the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was trapped. She had traded the terror of poverty for the terror of the Mafia. Around 4 a.m., there was a soft knock on the door. Leo stood in the hallway. "He's awake. He's asking for you." Harley followed Leo down the sprawling hallway. The master bedroom smelled strongly of antiseptic and iron. Damien was propped up against a mountain of white pillows. His chest and shoulder were professionally wrapped in stark white bandages. Intravenous lines fed clear fluids and painkillers into his arm. He looked pale, but the dangerous magnetic aura that surrounded him had returned in full force. The surgeon and Dominic were standing by the window, speaking in hushed tones, but they fell silent and left the room as Harley entered, closing the heavy oak doors behind them. Harley stood at the foot of the bed, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "You're alive. Thanks to you," Damien said. His voice was rough-tired, but his eyes swept over her with intense focus, looking for any sign of injury. "Is Mia okay?" "She's sleeping," Harley replied, her voice trembling slightly. "Damien, your man out there, Dominic, he says I can't leave. He says Gallo's looking for me." Damien's jaw tightened. Dominic is right. Vincent put out a blanket order. $1 million for my head and $500,000 for the nurse who kept me alive. You are a loose end to him, a liability. Harley let out a bitter, humorless laugh, tears finally welling in her eyes. "So I'm a prisoner." "You are a guest." Damien corrected his tone, leaving no room for argument. "You have unlimited funds. You have security. You have everything you could ever need in this penthouse." "I have a cage," Harley shouted, the exhaustion snapping her last nerve. She marched around the bed, leaning over him, her hazel eyes blazing. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be hunted by hitmen, or to have my daughter shot at. You barged into my life, bled on my floor, and dragged us to hell with you." Damien didn't flinch. He reached out with his uninjured right hand, his large calloused fingers wrapping gently but firmly around her wrist. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core, a stark contrast to the violence of the night. "I know," Damien said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "I ruined your quiet life, Harley, and I'll carry that guilt. But I also promised I would protect you. And Damien Russo does not break his word." He pulled her slightly closer. The scent of him, clean, soap-sharp mint, and something intrinsically dark and masculine overwhelmed her senses. "You are mine to protect now," Damien murmured, his stormy eyes locking onto hers with a possessive intensity that terrified her almost as much as the gunman had. "And heaven help the man who tries to take you from me." 3 weeks in the Gold Coast penthouse felt like 3 lifetimes. The bruising on Damien's face had faded to a yellowish hue, and his shoulder was healing with the terrifying, stubborn resilience of a man who refused to die. For Harley, The days blurred into a surreal mix of unimaginable luxury and suffocating paranoia. Mia thrived happily oblivious to the blood that paid for her new silk pajamas and the mountain of expensive toys delivered daily. But Harley couldn't sleep. Every time the private elevator hummed, her pulse skyrocketed. Damien noticed. He noticed everything. In the evenings, when the sprawling city below them glittered like shattered diamonds, Damien would find her on the glass-enclosed balcony. The dynamic between them had shifted from captive and captor to something far more dangerous. It was a slow, agonizing burn. He taught her how to hold the heavy 9mm pistol Dominic had procured for her, his large, warm hands wrapping over hers to correct her grip. He taught her the anatomy of the syndicate, mapping out the families so she knew exactly who wanted them dead. He was building her armor, piece by piece. "You're quiet tonight," Damien murmured, stepping onto the balcony. The sharp December wind whipped his dark hair. He wore a black dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the edge of the bandages he still wore. "Just thinking about the rent I'm missing," Harley said dryly, though her heart did the familiar, treacherous flutter it always did when he was near. Damien stepped closer, invading her personal space until the scent of his cedar-expensive cologne and danger enveloped her. "Gallo made a mistake today," he said, his voice dropping to a lethal octave. "He called a sit-down with the remaining capos at a warehouse in the Fulton Market District. He's trying to consolidate power, claiming I fled the country." Harley looked up into his stormy gray eyes. "You're going after him." It wasn't a question. "I'm going to end him," Damien corrected softly. He reached out his knuckles, grazing the soft curve of her cheek. The touch sent a shiver straight down her spine. "I take back the city tonight, Harley. And when it's done, you won't have to look over your shoulder ever again. I will give you the world on a silver platter." "I don't want the world, Damien," she whispered, leaning instinctively into his touch. "I just want my daughter to be safe." "She is. You both are." Damien leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was entirely consuming, a promise sealed in fire and gunpowder. It was demanding, possessive, and desperately tender. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were burning. "Lock the master's suite. Leo and 6 of my best men are stationed at the elevator and the fire exits. Do not open the door until you hear my voice." An hour later, the penthouse was suffocatingly quiet. Damien, Dominic, and the strike team had vanished into the night, leaving Harley alone with the elite guards. Harley tucked Mia into the massive king-sized bed in the master suite, reading her a story until the little girl's breathing leveled out into a soft, rhythmic hum. Harley set the book down and walked to the ensuite bathroom to splash cold water on her face. That was when the lights went out. The entire penthouse plunged into absolute darkness. The subtle hum of the HVAC system died. Harley froze, her blood turning to ice water. The backup generators should have kicked in instantly. The fact that they hadn't meant the system was manually severed from the inside. Harley didn't scream. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She felt her way through the dark bedroom, her fingers closing around the cold steel of the 9mm pistol Damien had left on the nightstand. She racked the slide, the metallic clack echoing loudly in the silent room. She pressed her back against the wall next to the heavy oak bedroom doors. "Leo," she called out, her voice barely above a whisper, straining to hear through the thick wood. Nothing. No radio chatter, no footsteps, just the terrifying heavy silence of the grave. Then she heard it. The soft metallic scrape of a keycard sliding into the electronic lock of the master suite. The heavy deadbolt clicked open. The door swung inward, moving on silent hinges. A figure stepped into the room, silhouetted by the faint moonlight, bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It wasn't Leo. It was a man named Rourke, one of the daytime security guards Damien had trusted. He held a suppressed pistol in his right hand, scanning the bed. "Gallo says hello," Rourke whispered to the empty room. Harley stepped out from the shadows. She didn't hesitate. Damien had taught her that hesitation killed. She raised the 9mm and pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, a blinding flash of muzzle flare illuminating the room. The bullet caught Rourke in the right shoulder, spinning him violently. He cursed his own weapon, firing blindly into the ceiling as he collapsed against the dresser. Harley didn't freeze. She stepped forward, kicking the suppressed weapon out of his hand. She pressed the hot barrel of her gun directly against Rourke's forehead as he slumped to the floor, gasping in pain. "Where are the others?" Harley demanded, her voice a terrifying, unrecognizable snarl. The mother from Pilsen was gone. The syndicate queen had arrived. "Dead!" Rourke choked out, blood staining his teeth. "Gallo paid me $2 million to disable the system and let his cleaners up the service elevator. They're in the foyer right now. You're a dead woman, Harley." Harley's eyes darted toward the hallway. Heavy, tactical footsteps were moving rapidly toward the master suite. There were too many of them. She had one magazine. She couldn't hold off a hit squad. She looked at her sleeping daughter, then back down to the traitor bleeding on her floor. She was out of time, out of options, and Damien was miles away. The warehouse in Fulton Market smelled of raw meat and impending death. Damien's boots crunched over shattered glass and brass casings. The raid had been a massacre. Dominic and the Loyalists had descended on Vincent Gallo's sight-down like a tidal wave of vengeance, catching the usurper completely off guard. Now, Gallo was crawling backward across the concrete floor, clutching a gaping wound in his stomach. Damien walked toward him, slowly reloading his weapon with chilling precision. "You're a relic, Damien." Gallo spat, coughing up blood. "You think killing me changes anything I already won?" Damien paused, the cold barrel of his gun coming to rest against Gallo's temple. "You took my men. You took my docks. What could you possibly have left to win?" A grotesque, bloody smile stretched across Gallo's face. "I bought Rourke. The cameras in your penthouse have been blind for 20 minutes. My cleaners are already there. Your little stray from the slums and her kid are bleeding out on your expensive marble right now." Damien's heart simply stopped. The world around him tilted on its axis. The ruthless composure that had defined his entire life shattered into a million jagged pieces. Harley. He pulled the trigger, ending Vincent Gallo's miserable life without a second thought. Damien spun around, sprinting toward the armored SUV idling outside. "Dominic, we have a breach at the penthouse, move." The drive back to the Gold Coast was an agonizing blur of roaring engines, flashing streetlights, and a suffocating, paralyzing dread. Damien didn't care about the police sirens wailing in the distance. He didn't care about the empire he had just reclaimed. If Harley was dead, the city would burn to the ground. They smashed through the gates of the subterranean garage. Damien didn't wait for the vehicle to park. He threw himself out, rushing the private elevator, his bloody hands smashing the emergency override buttons. When the doors parted on the penthouse level, the smell of gunpowder was thick enough to choke on. Damien stepped out, his weapon raised, his eyes wild. The foyer was a slaughterhouse. 3 men in tactical black gear lay dead on the Italian marble. The walls were riddled with bullet holes, the expensive artwork shredded. "Harley!" Damien roared, his voice breaking, echoing through the ruined luxury of his home. "Harley!" He sprinted down the hallway toward the master suite, his boots slipping on the blood slicks. The heavy oak doors were splintered, blown open by a shotgun blast. Damien threw himself into the room, dropping to his knees, expecting to find the worst. Expecting to find the woman who saved his life and her innocent child butchered because of his world. Instead, he froze. In the center of the room, Rourke lay dead. By the doorway, 2 more of Gallo's cleaners were slumped over, neutralized. And sitting on the edge of the bed, her arms wrapped fiercely around a crying Mia, was Harley. Her face was pale, smeared with soot, and a splash of blood that wasn't hers. Her hands were shaking violently, but her grip on the empty 9mm pistol in her lap was white-knuckled and absolute. She looked up as Damien entered, her hazel eyes wide, haunted but entirely unbreakable. She had used the choke point of the bedroom door. She had funneled them in. She had killed 3 trained hitmen to protect her child. Damien dropped his gun. It clattered uselessly against the hardwood. He crawled across the floor, pulling Harley and Mia into a desperate, crushing embrace. He buried his face in Harley's neck, inhaling the scent of her, feeling the frantic beating of her heart against his chest. For the first time in his life, Damien Russo, the most feared man in Chicago, wept. "I'm sorry." He choked out, kissing her hair, her forehead, her cheeks. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here." Harley dropped the empty gun, her trembling hands wrapping around his broad shoulders, clinging to him like a lifeline. "I told you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm a desperate mother. You never underestimate a desperate mother." Damien pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. The fire he saw there wasn't just survival anymore. It was an awakening. She had crossed the threshold. She understood the blood, the cost, and the terrifying power of their reality. "Vincent is dead," Damien said softly, wiping a smear of soot from her cheek with his thumb. "The war is over. The city is ours." Harley looked at the bodies in her room, then at the man holding her. The broken door in Pilsen felt like a lifetime ago. She wasn't the struggling girl dodging eviction notices anymore. She had walked through the fire with the devil, and she had come out the other side. "Then we need to get the carpets cleaned," Harley said, her voice steadying, a faint, dangerous smirk touching her lips. "I won't have my daughter waking up to a mess." Damien let out a breathless, disbelieving laugh. He leaned in, kissing her with a fierce, absolute devotion that sealed their fate forever. She wasn't just a savior anymore. She wasn't just a lover. She was his queen, and their reign had just begun. What a breathtaking finale. From a desperate single mother dodging eviction notices to the fiercely protective queen of the Chicago syndicate, Harley Hayes proved that a mother's love is deadlier than any mafia hitman. Damien Russo may have conquered the city, but it was Harley who ultimately saved his empire and his soul. If you loved the intense romance, the explosive action, and the unbelievable twists in this story, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below telling us what you thought of Harley's incredible transformation. Share this video with your friends and hit the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling saga.